He directed a casual question at Professor Dr. Detlef Amadeus Unterholzer. "Tell me, Herr Unterholzer," he said, "if you were to want to go to America to give a lecture, how would you get yourself invited, so to speak?" Quickly adding, "Not that I would ever be in such a position myself, but you yourself could be, could you not?" Unterholzer had an immediate answer. "I should contact the Deutsche Akademische Austauschdienst," he said. "I should tell them who I was, and I should ask them to arrange a lecture somewhere in America. That is what they are paid to do." "I see," said von Igelfeld. "That would no doubt save embarrassment." "Of course," said Unterholzer. "They are experts in finding places for German academics to go and lecture to other people whether or not they want to hear them. They are very persuasive people. That is how I went to Buenos Aires and gave my lecture there. It really works." And indeed, it did. The local director of the Deutsche Akademische Austauschdienst was delighted to hear from von Igelfeld the following day, and assured him that a scholar of his eminence would be snapped up should he deign to leave Germany. It was only a question of finding the right institution and making the detailed arrangements. "Rest assured that you will be invited within days," von Igelfeld was assured. "Just leave it all in our capable hands." Thus von Igelfeld found himself arriving in Fayetteville, Arkansas, a charming college town nestling in the Ozark Mountains, seat of the University of Arkansas, or at least of that part not located in the minor campus at Little Rock. When the whole idea was conceived, he had not envisaged going to Arkansas. He had imagined that his destination might be California or New York, perhaps. But one American state was very much the same as another, at least in von Igelfeld's view, and it really made no difference. The important thing was that he was going to America, and a good 2 weeks ahead of Prinzel. Von Igelfeld's host greeted him warmly. They had insisted that he stay with them rather than in a hotel, and so von Igelfeld found himself installed in the sleeping porch of a traditional Ozark farmhouse on the edge of the town, the home of Professor R.B. Lafleur. After he had unpacked, he and von Igelfeld sat down on the swing seat on the front veranda and discussed his program. There would be visits to the surrounding area the next day, promised Professor Lafleur, and the day after that a set-piece lecture had been planned before an open audience. That night, after dinner, von Igelfeld retired to his bed and looked out through the gauze-covered porch windows. The house was surrounded by mixed forest, oak trees and sycamores, and their shapes, dark silhouettes, swayed in the breeze. And there, he thought, there's the moon, rising slowly over the trees like a giant lantern. What were they planning for him tomorrow? Would they show him their libraries? Were there manuscripts? What about Lafleur's maternal grandfather, the adventurer Charles Finger? He had been in South America, and may have come across some Portuguese manuscripts of note, which could well be in the attic above his very head. Arkansas, it seemed, was rich in possibilities for the philologist. The next morning he ate a hearty breakfast with Professor and Mrs. Lafleur before they set off. "We're heading north," said his host. "We'll show you a typical hog operation." "Most intriguing," said von Igelfeld. "I am always interested in—" He paused. What was he interested in? Philology? Portuguese verbs? "I am always interested in everything." They drove out of town, following a road that wound up into the hills. It was a gentle landscape, limestone hills which had been softened by the action of the rain, meandering valleys dotted with farmhouses under shady oak trees. Von Igelfeld hadn't thought of America as being at all like this. There were no dry plains, no glittering Dallas in the distance, no leafy suburbia with neat white houses. This could have been Bavaria, or even Austria. Suddenly, Lafleur turned off the road and followed a dusty track leading towards a large, unpainted barn. "Here we are," he said. "They're expecting us." The farmer came out and shook von Igelfeld's hand. Von Igelfeld sniffed the air. It was distinctly malodorous. "This way," said the farmer. "The hogs are in here." The farmer opened a door in the side of the barn and ushered von Igelfeld inside. For the next half-hour they wandered between rows of large sties, each surmounted by a large sun-lamp and each filled with a squealing mass of pigs. The farmer demonstrated the automatic feeding system and showed von Igelfeld the blood-sampling equipment. "We're mighty careful about viruses here," he said. "You know all about that." Von Igelfeld looked at the farmer. Did pigs get colds, he wondered? "You have to be careful about viruses," he agreed. "I myself always use vitamin C during the winter." He didn't finish. "You're right," said the farmer. "Each pig gets 60 IU vitamin C every morning with its food, and then we give them a shot of B group when they're 7 weeks old. Some people are trying a short course of potassium a week before market. What do you think?" Von Igelfeld shook his head. "You have to be careful," he said. "I would never use potassium myself." The farmer listened intently. "You hear that, Professor Lafleur? No potassium. I'm inclined to agree with our visitor. You tell those folks down in Little Rock, no potassium. The Germans recommend against it." Lafleur nodded. "Could be," he said. An hour later they set off again. After a brief lunch they made their way to a chicken farm, where von Igelfeld was shown the latest methods of production by a farmer who spoke in such a way that he could understand not one word. Then there was a call at some sort of animal laboratory, which interested von Igelfeld very little. Then home to dinner. That night, in the silence of his sleeping porch, von Igelfeld reflected on his day. It had been interesting in its way, but he wondered why they had chosen to show him all those farms and animals. Animals were all very well. Indeed, he had once written a small paper on the nature of collective nouns used for groups of animals, but that was about as far as his interest went. Still, this was America, and he assumed that this was what they laid on for all their visitors. The lecture was to be at 6:30 following a short reception. When von Igelfeld arrived with Lafleur, the audience was largely assembled, milling about the anteroom of the lecture theatre. Glasses of wine had been provided, and plates of snacks were being circulated by waitresses dressed in black and white. Everybody seemed keen to talk to von Igelfeld. "We've all heard about your work," said one man in a lightweight blue suit. "In fact, I've got an off-print here which I thought you might care to sign." "I'd be happy to do so," said von Igelfeld. And what about Portuguese irregular verbs, he reflected. Were there copies even here in Fayetteville, amongst these charming hills? The man in the blue suit produced a pamphlet from his pocket. "I was sent this by a colleague in Germany," he said. "He thought that I might find it useful, and I sure did." Von Igelfeld took the pamphlet. The cover was unfamiliar. All his off-prints from the Zeitschrift were bound in a plain white cover. This one was blue. He adjusted his reading glasses and looked at the title page. "Further Studies of Canine Pulmonary Efficiency," he read, and then, "by Professor Martin Igelfeld, University of Münster." Von Igelfeld stared at the page for a moment, his heart a cold stone within him. It was immediately clear to him what had happened. They thought that he was Professor Igelfeld, Dean of Veterinary Medicine at Münster. Von Igelfeld knew of Igelfeld's existence, as he had seen the remarkably similar name in the newspaper during an anthrax scare. But he had never dreamed that there would be confusion on such a heroic